Green Party co-leader Russel Norman's with us now. Good morning.
Good morning, Jeff.
So let's get this clear. Part of the next government, whether it's National-led or Labour-led?
Well, we'll make a decision about our political positioning in the lead up to each election, as we do each time. We at our AGM before each election, we make an announcement. Like we said last time, that it was highly unlikely with National, and I think where National's gone since the election with their moves to the right, clearly it is more unlikely.
How, in your view, will the Greens change between now and the next election?
Well, I think part of it is the development of our policy. So we've put quite a bit of work into policy, but at each electoral cycle, I think you need to look at your policy again to make sure it's up to date and relevant. So that's about being ready for government. I mean, we put a lot of work into our priorities before the last election, so we were ready for government if that opportunity came our way. But we need to do that again in the lead up to the next cycle and the next election. And then we also need to look at our organisation. Our organisation has come on very significantly from where it was, say, 6 years ago. But we need to strengthen that further so that we're in a position to, put up a good election campaign.
Where do you stand now on mining? I mean, I understand you're against coal mining, but you seem to be saying, well, other mining's all right.
Yeah, so our view has always been that we're not opposed to all mining, full stop. And so I restated that position over the weekend.
But it depends where the mining is, presumably.
Well, that's right.
Yeah.
And what it is. So obviously we've said no new coal mines because of the impact of coal on greenhouse effect. And so we've also, after the Deepwater Horizon disaster in the Gulf of Mexico, we realised that deep water oil drilling has environmental risks that I think even we weren't really properly aware of. I mean, the oil companies can't plug a hole in deep water. In the end, they had to drill a relief well. So obviously we had new concerns about that, and then all the evidence that's coming out of the United States about fracking, out of Australia about underground coal gasification. We've been saying we should have a moratorium on those kind of experimental forms given the environmental impacts. But that doesn't mean that we have an absolute opposition to all mining, and we consider it on a case-by-case basis.
You're against motorways, you're against all the sort of infrastructure building that's going on at the moment, but doesn't the country need that kind of stuff to get the economy moving?
Well, we certainly need infrastructure, and we support some of the infrastructure projects. For example, the broadband, I think was a good initiative. Even though the business case is a little bit wobbly for broadband, I can understand where it's going, because obviously that's going to be part of the clean green economy, in fact. In terms of the new motorways that they're proposing, the $14 billion spend, it's a huge amount of money. We just think that in light of record high oil prices, in light of the fact that the International Monetary Fund just put out a paper saying they expect the price of oil to double in 10 years, that we should be investing in the alternatives that make us less dependent on oil.
Because people still want to get across Auckland. They're still going to need to travel from north to south, east to west. At the moment, we get in our car and do it.
Yeah, that's right. And in other cities that have invested in better public transport systems or have better urban form, they either take a bus or a train or light rail, or they walk or they cycle because it's safe to do so if it's a short distance.
So you force the population to change its attitudes to travel by saying you can't do this?
Well, I would argue it's the other way around. So if you look at motorways, they force people into their cars when oil is very expensive, whether people want to or not, because they're not given any choices. I think people should have choices about how they travel, and at the moment the National Party is forcing everyone into their cars, even though the price of oil is sky high. And looking at the economic impacts, the oil import bill is about $8 billion per year. Right? If the IMF is right, that's set to double, perhaps more, and that puts a huge pressure on our external accounts. We have to come up with $8 billion from something else.
But it brings us back to the point you were talking about earlier. If there are billions of dollars worth of oil under the sea some way out, then one answer is, well, let's get down, drill it and use it.
Well, it's important to distinguish between those two parts. So there's nothing, they're not naturally connected, if you like. There's no connection necessarily between exporting oil and importing oil. You can have, you can reduce your imports of oil, become less oil dependent, which is good for your economy, separate of the question of how much oil you export. And so there's no need to connect those two parts together.
You don't think that's a bit too sophisticated for the electorate? I mean, Most people just see oil as oil, you know.
I have a very high opinion of Radio New Zealand listeners, Jeff, and I think that they can
I'm
figure
talking
it
about the
out.
electorate, not just our listeners.
I'm sure they can figure it out, that if we reduce our oil dependence, the amount we spend importing oil, it is good for our external accounts and puts less pressure on our economy. Remember, New Zealand has been running a major current account deficit for a number of years. That was one of the problems that the National Party inherited when they took office, was that the chronic current account deficit, and they said they'd rebalance our economy. But looking at the projections that are in the budget that National just did, the current account deficit deteriorates to about 7% of GDP in their own projections. So one of those critical issues is dealing with our external imbalances, the current account deficit, and one of the ways that we can make some progress on that is reducing our oil imports. I think we should embrace that opportunity. Instead, National wants to make us more dependent. I think that's an economic mistake.
Thanks for joining us this morning. That's Dr. Russel Norman, Green Party co-leader.